February 2000. The internet was still shiny and new, full of promise. And then suddenly, it wasn't. One morning, millions of people tried to log on to Yahoo, the biggest search engine at the time, and nothing. The site was frozen. Then CNN dropped, then eBay, then Amazon. Within hours, the giants of the online world were all flatlined. People thought it was the end of the internet. News anchors were calling it one of the biggest cyber attacks in history. Businesses were losing millions by the hour. Politicians were on TV warning that the digital future might not be as secure as everyone thought. And here's the kicker. The person responsible for this chaos wasn't a criminal empire, wasn't the Russian mob, wasn't even some genius hacker collective. It was a single 15-year-old kid in Montreal. Online, he went by one name, MafiaBoy. This teenager pulled off an attack so powerful that it shook governments, tanked stocks, and forced the entire world to rethink how vulnerable the internet really was. And he didn't even mean to start a cyber war. He just wanted to show off. This is the story of how one kid exposed the internet's biggest weakness. Before MafiaBoy hit, the internet felt like the Wild West. .com startups were sprouting up overnight, everyone was rushing to stake their claim online, and the world was obsessed with this new digital gold rush. Yahoo was the king of search engines. Amazon was just starting to show it could dominate online shopping, and CNN was experimenting with streaming news on the web, something that seemed futuristic at the time. But here's the thing, while everyone was racing to grow, almost nobody was thinking about security. Companies treated cybersecurity like an afterthought. Servers were often poorly configured. Networks were easy to overwhelm. And the idea that a single person could bring down a massive website? That was almost laughable. Until it actually happened. Back then, the internet was still full of loopholes, poorly patched vulnerabilities, and naive confidence. People were trusting these platforms with their money, personal information, and communication. But the infrastructure was fragile. It was like building a skyscraper out of paper, impressive from afar, but one gust of wind and everything could collapse. So when a teenage hacker decided to see what would happen if he just pushed the system to its limits, the stage was already set for disaster. The internet had never been tested like this before, and the results would shock the world. So who exactly was this kid who managed to shake the entire internet? MafiaBoy's real name was Michael Calci, a 15-year-old from Montreal, Canada. Just a regular high schooler by day, but by night he was diving into a world of computers and code that most adults didn't even understand. Michael wasn't some genius prodigy who had been groomed in secret hacker labs. He was a curious, ambitious kid who loved exploring the limits of technology, reading online forums, and experimenting with the tools he found. He spent hours tinkering with networks, learning about vulnerabilities, and figuring out how websites communicated with each other. It wasn't about money or fame for him, at least not in the traditional sense. He just wanted to test boundaries, push limits, and honestly, see what would happen if he tried something no one had dared to attempt. Think of it like a kid building a massive domino setup in his living room, not realizing that knocking it over might accidentally flatten the whole neighborhood. By the time the world knew his name, MafiaBoy had become the most infamous teenager on the planet. Suddenly, everyone was asking, how could one 15-year-old bring down some of the biggest websites in the world? And more importantly, what did it say about the internet we were all trusting so blindly? So how did a 15-year-old actually take down the internet's biggest websites? MafiaBoy's tool of choice was something called a distributed denial of service attack, or DDoS for short. Basically, it's like flooding a store with thousands of people all at once, so the doors get jammed, the staff can't handle it, and nothing can function. Only in this case, the store was Yahoo, Amazon, CNN, and others, and the people were computers, sending millions of requests. Michael didn't have a massive army of servers. He relied on what he could find online. He scoured the internet for unsecured computers, routers, and servers that he could temporarily control to amplify his attacks. In hacker lingo, these were called zombies, part of a botnet that did exactly what he told them to do. The more machines he could enlist, the bigger the flood. His plan wasn't incredibly sophisticated in terms of coding brilliance, but it was brilliant in strategy. He knew which websites were popular, which servers were vulnerable, and how to time his attacks for maximum disruption. He launched them at precisely the right moments, hitting Yahoo first, then Amazon, then eBay, spreading chaos across the globe within hours. By the time IT teams were scrambling to stop him, the damage was done. Websites were offline, stocks were dropping, and the world had no idea how a teenager had managed to make the digital giants crumble like dominoes. When MafiaBoy hit the internet, the world freaked out. Websites that people relied on every day, Yahoo, CNN, Amazon, eBay, were suddenly unreachable. Businesses were losing millions by the hour. News anchors were broadcasting from studios with blank screens behind them, trying to explain why the digital world was melting down. The media quickly turned this into a full-blown panic. Headlines screamed, "Teenage hacker takes down the internet," and governments demanded answers. Departments across the globe were working around the clock, but they were unprepared for the scale of the attack. Companies realized, sometimes painfully, that their servers weren't ready for anything close to what MafiaBoy unleashed. Socially, it was chaos too. People who had just started trusting online banking, shopping, and email suddenly felt exposed. Everyone began to ask, if a 15-year-old could bring down the web, how safe was anything we were doing online? And for MafiaBoy, the attention skyrocketed. News crews wanted interviews. Newspapers ran front-page stories, and suddenly, a regular Canadian teenager became the face of the biggest cyber event of the year. It was the moment the world realized that the internet was far more fragile than anyone had imagined, and that one curious kid could expose it in a way no one thought possible. Once the dust started to settle, the world had to face the reality. The internet wasn't just fragile, it was practically defenseless against someone like MafiaBoy. Governments, tech companies, and cybersecurity experts scrambled to respond. Law enforcement quickly got involved, but this was new territory. The RCMP in Canada, along with the FBI in the US, were suddenly chasing a teenage hacker through cyberspace, a field where rules, jurisdiction, and even evidence collection were still being figured out. It was like hunting a ghost with a magnifying glass. On the tech side, IT teams started analyzing every vulnerability that MafiaBoy had exploited. Firewalls were strengthened, server capacities were upgraded, and companies began developing monitoring systems to detect unusual traffic before it could become catastrophic. Essentially, this single attack accelerated the growth of modern cybersecurity by years. For the average person, these changes weren't immediately visible. But the world had learned a painful lesson. The internet could no longer be trusted blindly. And for hackers everywhere, MafiaBoy had just rewritten the playbook, showing how a well-placed, relatively simple attack could create global chaos. This wasn't just about catching one kid. It was a wake-up call that the digital age was still in its infancy, and the rules of safety and security had to be rewritten fast. After weeks of investigation, the authorities finally tracked down MafiaBoy Michael Calce in his bedroom in Montreal. Imagine a 15-year-old sitting at his computer, suddenly realizing that the chaos he caused had caught up with him. The teenager who had once been a curious experimenter was now facing the full weight of the law. Michael was charged with multiple counts of mischief and fraud related to his attacks. In a court, the story of a kid taking on the biggest companies in the world became a media sensation. While some people admired his technical skill, others were shocked that someone so young could disrupt the global economy. He served a relatively short sentence in juvenile detention, but the impact of his actions followed him for years. Beyond legal consequences, MafiaBoy's life changed. He went from being a regular teenager to a case study in cybersecurity classes and a cautionary tale for tech companies. The bigger consequence, though, wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Companies finally realized they couldn't ignore cybersecurity. Governments began taking cybercrime seriously, and the world started thinking about the internet not just as a playground, but as a critical infrastructure that needed protection. MafiaBoy wasn't just a headline. He became a wake-up call. The internet had been treated like an untouchable, magical space, but suddenly everyone realized it was vulnerable and surprisingly fragile. The attack forced companies, governments, and everyday users to take cybersecurity seriously for the first time. For tech companies, it meant overhauling security systems, creating more robust firewalls, monitoring for unusual traffic, and thinking proactively about threats rather than reacting after disaster struck. For law enforcement, it sparked the creation of specialized cybercrime units and international cooperation to track hackers across borders. And for the rest of us? MafiaBoy's story was a reminder that technology isn't invincible. One person, armed with curiosity and determination, could expose weaknesses in systems that billions relied on. His legacy is a mix of caution and inspiration. Caution because the internet can be fragile, and inspiration because a single individual can make a huge impact, for better or worse. Even today, cybersecurity experts still reference his attacks when teaching about DDoS attacks, network vulnerabilities, and how teenage curiosity can unexpectedly shake the digital world. MafiaBoy's story reminds us the digital frontier may feel limitless, but every system has its cracks, and sometimes one teen is all it takes to find them.